Good morning, dear poets. A grey light for once coming in through my window, and some rain. So at last, we're relieved, actually. We've had so much continuous sunshine, which is wonderful, but the plants have needed a lot of watering, and we have a lot of plants. Except that we've now sold our house and are moving up 10 minutes away into the foothills of Mount Overlook behind us. A wonderful mountain that from the top you can see 7 states. And we're going to be in the woods there in a small house that we've owned for a long time with lovely tenants who thankfully have found another nice place to go and live. And so we're moving on, but for the moment we're still tending to our plants and they've needed a lot of water. So I wanted to complete our little cycle with a second video, but not to add anything of my own really to Paul's poetry. I wanted you to know what you yourselves had written in answer to the so-called quiz about his poems, because that's the only part of our class where we don't automatically all share with each other. You send me the quiz, which is right, because I don't want anybody to feel under pressure to complete the quiz one way or another. But it does mean that you don't know what each other are saying about the poems, and I thought you might be curious. Also, a very interesting thing was written to me by Megan, which I wasn't expecting, but which makes a lot of sense to me. Sorry, I'm disappearing from your view as I bend down to plug in my laptop. She wrote that I found throughout this class that through this class, that I really enjoy describing my experience of reading someone else's poetry. Those thoughts go through one's mind with less clarity as you read, but it's so much more fulfilling when you take the time to write it out. It's a very interesting point. It's true that in a workshop, you say what you may have already planned to say, but it comes out in a way that is not exactly as you may have planned. Maybe it more or less is, but it comes out and it's gone, and you don't know what exactly it was that you said. And the beauty of writing down your comments is that you do say exactly what you mean, or as close as we ever get to that. And I think there's something rewarding in that, and in experiencing yourself as critic. So I was very happy about that. And I hadn't thought about that, and I thought, oh gosh, that makes total sense. So I'm just opening at random Tiffany talking about Haiti and Toussaint Louverture, who I'm very happy you've discovered, if you have. This is a discovery. And she speaks of how the poems seem to flow, such rhythm, such pace. It felt like these poems could be a rap song. I like that. I shall certainly pass that on to Paul. Maybe I can persuade him to deliver them as rap. That would be so cool. And she talks about the spacing and matching the rhythm of it with the spacing does something different than it would if it were just simply put down. And it certainly encourages you to find the spaces in the right place. And she says, I think political correctness does bring a new perspective on the tradition, which is fair enough. And I don't blame her for not particularly wishing to plunge any further into the potential controversy, although you certainly couldn't upset me, whatever you said on this subject. And Catching Fire is her favorite one, and she found it as real and raw as Audre Lorde's poem Power. I clung to each word. That's so wonderful. And indeed, the beginning, I want my son's first words to be, please don't shoot, I think is kind of unforgettable as a start. It's really extraordinary. So I was very happy to read that. And Marina says she's had several classes of Haitian or by and large Caribbean writers, but prose classes, and she clearly remembers the Edwige Danticat book, Breath, Eyes, Memory, and what a huge experience that was, as it always is. And she checked out L'Ouverture, which is great. As I say, I think I referred to him somewhere to one of you as the Spartacus of Haiti, Spartacus being a man in Roman history who led a slaves' revolt, the gladiators' revolt, which raised a big army and roamed around Italy for quite a while before eventually being subdued by the Roman troops. Quite a story, starring Kirk Douglas. If you ever see the Hollywood movie version of it, and it has the moment that became a meme and immortal, at least until now, where Olivier, Sir Laurence Olivier, the celebrated British classical actor, who was playing, I don't know, maybe an imaginary character, but the leading Roman general, maybe a real character. They've finally captured the ragtag army of slaves, and he rides up and down these captured irregulars, soldiers, and demands to know which of them is Spartacus. And there's a pause, and before Kirk Douglas, who is Spartacus, can step forward, one of the others steps forward to his and everybody's amazement and says, "I am Spartacus." And everyone gets the idea. And somebody else steps forward, and somebody else, until everyone is saying, "I am Spartacus." A wonderful moment. It can bring you to tears, as can human nobility when we get a chance to see it. So that's Spartacus. And Marina says of Haiti's contemporary history, it's a broken body that would always has the stitches that ache here and there, and it's true. The DNA of every future Haitian to come to this world, history in flesh and blood, which indeed is, it's what Haitians are and what Paul is and his poems are. And she says, every time I go over the work of a Haitian writer, every single time it's as heavy as the earth itself. No one deserves to carry such burdensome events. Paul's poems are so incredibly beautiful that I ran out of words. They're deepened with honest pain, true reality, uncovered misery of unfortunate people, extreme struggle. And she's quite right. And she quotes part of the poem that runs, "The night ran its mascara into the next morning, all day like an eclipse, just black, just still, just like me." And she says, one would think it's a simple combination of words, but looking at what is hidden behind the words, the pain leaving its trace on each day, it is truly astonishing. And she makes some comment on the absence of capital letters, which is a modern tradition taken on by many writers who I think, it'd be fair to say, feel that a break with the formality, it's like not wearing a tie. it's time not to be wearing a tie. I'm in a fortunate situation. I can't wear a tie anymore because you can't see it. And it's a waste of time. So although I haven't worn a tie for many years, even before my beard was long, I'm now spared the issue. I'm clearly not making a defiant statement by not wearing a tie. There are many advantages to having a long beard. And she is talking about the jagged little words, the jagged way the poetry is laid out as inducing the reader to think, perhaps go back and reread to understand better. And as a favorite, she picks out the poem Color. And they say, if you want to suffocate someone, use a clear bag. Use a clear bag. That way you can see how hard they are trying to breathe. They say if you want to suffocate a heart, use a clear body. Someone so empty. And she comments on wisely on that too. It's that's certainly Paul's true poetic ability there. And then she comments on Catching Fire and another poem. And when someone writes, I want my son's first words to be, please don't shoot. Certainly it's an extraordinary line which, in saying it, you want it to be read aloud at meetings, read aloud where the Black Lives Matter protesters come to congregate and listen to the words of their leaders, everybody's words, anybody's words, but that poem, I feel, should be read and almost adopted as a slogan, as a poetic manifesto of the Black Lives Matter movement. It's very striking to read. So that's those are among the things that Marina says, which I was very thrilled to read. And Megan talks about Haiti having a haunting ring to its existence, which is right. A sort of cry for redemption, a sort of example of what happens when exploitation and greed take over. After researching about Haiti, I learned that it's a country that's made up almost entirely of descendants of African slaves, and that's correct. It's the second country after the US to free itself from colonial rule. It's interesting. I always knew that Haiti was an impoverished country, but I didn't know that it's the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. And as she says, the poorest, what a title. And she talks about Toussaint. She says the current history is grim, honestly heartbreaking, the deforestation that dates back to colonial times and still, as she says, shocks and skins the land. I saw a picture on Google Images of a side-by-side comparison of the topography of Haiti and of the Dominican Republic. Haiti being dry and barren, while the only visible green is on the other side of the stark border dividing the two countries. There's a persistent cholera epidemic is believed to stay active in the water systems. Overpopulation, lack of sanitization. And she says she traveled to the Dominican Republic 10 years ago after the hurricane season that ravaged Haiti, and she remembers seeing women holding babies in the highway, standing on the slim dividers begging for food. And she remembers Dominican people complaining about Haitians trying to sneak into their country. It reminds me of the real pandemic of immigration and all the lack of empathy surrounding it, which is quite right. As a body of work, she says, Paul's poetry speaks of a void and all the darkness that is associated with that ominous unknown emptiness. I felt a struggle with addiction, with love being one and the same thing at times. There was a physicality to his poems, an obsession with the body and its various parts. Body, sacrifice of body, mouth, things that come out of mouth, things mouth can say to hurt and heal. And she notes that he quotes Rihanna lyrics for like half a poem. What a man! As she exclaims. Quite right. Many of the poems felt intimate with its expression of emotion, but just as many felt disassociated, estranged. I felt the ache, I felt the rage, I felt the humor as a way to survive. And she quotes a favorite line of mine, or collection of lines, where he writes, feels like I'm going insane, trying to find shelter in a shanty town of a woman. And she says, it's my favorite example, she says, of how Paul uses jagged spacing to make the reader feel how out of breath he is, how anxious he is, how frantic and erratic his feelings. His words are just as fragmented as his heart. And I think that I like to feel that some of the poetry we look at, you will regard as independent of the identity of the poet, independent of the poet's era, gender, age, anything, as belonging to the body of poetry that is your legacy as a poet, by which I simply mean any and all devices that are enabled in poetry by poets. They all belong to you. That's what poets are doing. They're handing it on to you. They're saying, here's a way of saying it. Here's a way of putting it on the page if you would like to. It's yours as much as it's mine. And so I think it's precious to see what different poets have done, including poets from outside, from far from one's own identity and one's own period. So there's that lovely jagged writing, if ever you should feel compelled, as well you might, to speak as jaggedly as that. It speaks of the emotion that's driving it and the need, the need to impress upon the reader how jaggedly these words come out of the mouth, out of the body of the poet. They don't come fluently like a classical sonnet, although, in fairness, many classical sonnets and many great sonnets of Shakespeare's are written as much in agony as Paul's, but they flow through. So in this case, Megan writes a little more about the political correctness issue. She says, I think there's always going to be someone somewhere who thinks it their duty to wave the flag of what is and what is not politically correct. That being said, I want to make sure I understand the question correctly. Are you asking if political correctness changes the tradition of sexual politics in poetry? If so, because that's how I understand the question, then I would have to say yes and no. And I think she's quite right. Yes, because inherently, if you're even slightly aware of the world around you, which most poets are, you'll be aware of what something means to most people in the context of the modern day. What you choose to do with these awareness is up to you. With these associations, these contextual understandings, which is why I say at the same time no, because poetry is an art form. It has the freedom and the duty to be true to the person making it. And that being said, if you choose to be angry at a woman or a man in a poem because you love them and they hurt you, and you paint a negative light around them and damn them to hell and call them obscenities, then it's your prerogative as the creator. Anyone who wants to say that someone is not politically correct within art seems like they have too much time on their hands. I think that Megan could get an argument from a few people on that. Her favourite poem is Cacti, which may well be my favourite too. It's so full of roughness, pain, scaly feeling. It's shamelessly pointing a finger at someone who caused hurt. Its purpose is to heal the one writing it, or at least that's how I felt, says Megan. I think that's very good. It's funny, now that I've said that classical sonnets can be just as painful, I would like to jump to one of Shakespeare's sonnets written in excruciating pain. What Limbeck's foul? I'm just looking up Limbeck's foul. Not a word that, not a phrase that comes up often. To get myself to sonnet 119 is where I want to go. And look at what it's like to be in agony in a formal sonnet. He says, "What potions have I drunk of siren tears, distilled from Limbeck's foul as hell within." So he's drunk some pretty heady drinks composed of the tears of sirens. Sirens, remember, luring sailors to their death. Distilled, these potions, from Limbeck's. These are more chemical potions, but these ones are foul as hell within. Applying fears to hopes, and hopes to fears, still losing when I saw myself to win. This has been his tormented relationship with a beautiful woman. Oh, I'm going on longer than I ever intended to. Please forgive me. What wretched errors hath my heart committed whilst it hath thought itself so blessed never? How have mine eyes out of their spheres been fitted in the distraction of this madding fever? Oh, benefit of ill. Now I find true the better is by evil still made better, and ruined love, when it is built anew, grows fairer than at first, more strong, far greater. So I return, rebuked, to my content, and gain by ills thrice more than I have spent. Shakespeare, on the whole, loves to give us closure, give us a happy ending, even when the things he describes are terrible in his sonnets. And we know that the torture he went through at the hands of the woman known as the Dark Lady, because she seems to have been dark in some respect, dark-haired, perhaps, dark-skinned, also possible in the London of the time. As he implies, she is dark. And he introduced her to his beloved boy, the young man whom he adored, and they had an affair. This is quite a drama. The sonnets are a fabulous and extraordinary story. The tale of a love triangle, an immortal tale written by an immortal hand. So it's really an extraordinary domestic drama, romantic drama of a kind unique in the literature of the period. So he's been put through hell by her, and yet ruined love, when built anew, is stronger than before. she comes back to him and happiness is restored. Thank you for listening to this longer than this is supposed to be 15 minutes. How can I really have gone on for 25? I'm so sorry. And we'll speak again next week when I have a wholly new poet for you. Have a good weekend. Maybe happy to have it a little cooler. I don't know what your temperature is like. As I always say, I don't know at all what it's like in Oregon. So have a lovely and safe, please, weekend. Bye.